Okay, picture this. A patient walks into the ER after a really severe accident. They have this traumatic, frankly gruesome open fracture. I mean, the bone is visibly protruding right through the skin,
Yikes.
right? So the surgeon treats them, the documentation goes through, and the medical coder looks at the chart. They see this glaring open wound, so obviously they bill it as an open treatment, right? I mean, it just seems like common sense. But it is actually completely wrong. Doing that is almost guaranteed to trigger a compliance audit and get that claim utterly denied.
Oh yeah, it's a massive cognitive trap, and honestly, it catches really smart medical coders every single day. Because the correct, fully compliant billing code for that specific encounter is very often a closed treatment. And that is completely regardless of what your eyes are screaming at you about the patient's traumatic injury.
Welcome to this explainer, where we are going to completely dismantle the flawed logic behind this major coding paradox. Because honestly, it feels incredibly counterintuitive. How does a literal open wound end up coded as closed? The system feels totally broken until you actually understand the fundamental rules of the CPT musculoskeletal guidelines. The reason coders are failing here is because they're trying to combine two completely different languages into one single workflow. It is literally like trying to translate French to Spanish, but you're using a German dictionary. You simply cannot map a visual diagnosis directly to a surgical treatment code. In orthopedics, that assumption is going to burn you every single time. Which brings us to Section 1, ICD-10 versus CPT, the Great Divide. And this right here is the absolute root of the problem. It's confusing the patient's condition with the surgeon's action.
Okay, so breaking down this divide, ICD-10 is purely about the injury itself, right?
Right. It describes the patient's condition the moment they arrive, like that traumatic open wound we just talked about. CPT, on the other hand, is strictly about the specific service. It is the surgeon's action.
Because let's be real, insurance companies aren't paying you based on how bad the leg looks. They are paying based on what the doctor actually did to fix it.
Exactly. Your CPT code selection depends 100% on the provider's physical intervention. If you want to survive audits and, keep your sanity, your logic has to fundamentally shift away from the visual diagnosis and lock in entirely on the procedure itself. All right, let's get into the mechanics. Section 2, the 3 mechanical categories. Because in CPT, the ultimate goal, which is stabilizing the bone, doesn't really dictate the code. What actually matters is exactly how the surgeon gets in there. So you are scanning that operative report for one of 3 specific pathways. Number 1, closed treatment. Number 2, open surgical treatment. And number 3, percutaneous skeletal fixation.
So basically, every single fracture claim you ever process is going to route through one of these 3 buckets?
Every single one, no exceptions. And it is based purely on the surgeon's entry method, nothing else. Okay, let's tackle the one that trips everyone up first, closed treatment. The formal definition says it's an intervention where the surgeon does not make a surgical opening at the fracture site. But people hear the word closed, and they immediately picture, a gentle bandage wrap. Oh, it is far from gentle. No scalpel absolutely does not mean no force. Just because the site remains technically closed, it doesn't mean the provider is just passively sitting there. Actually, many closed treatments involve a massive amount of intense physical force. You are forcefully snapping bones back into place. You just aren't surgically cutting the patient open to do it. Right, which brings us to the active techniques in a closed scenario. And the really big one here is manipulation.
Yes, manipulation. This is the manual reduction of a fracture. The surgeon is physically realigning bone fragments using only their hands or external force, like traction. These are highly active interventions, completely different from simple fracture care where you just let the bone heal on its own. For example, if you see active closed manipulation for a wrist, you're just dropping into the 25,600 code range. The hand is right around 26,700. Or for larger structures like, say, a tibia, you're looking at the 27,750 range. So it's fast, it is forceful, but crucially, it is closed.
Okay, so let's circle all the way back to our initial paradox with the protruding bone. If a coder must select from that closed bracket as long as there is no surgical incision, well, that explains everything. It literally does not matter how visually severe the injury is.
Bingo! That is the trap. If the bone is sticking out of the leg from a gruesome trauma, but the surgeon does not take a scalpel and surgically extend that opening to treat the bone, it simply does not count as open treatment. In the CPT world, open refers strictly to the surgeon's act of opening the tissue and has absolutely zero to do with the patient's condition upon arrival.
True open treatment means a literal, deliberate, surgical opening of the tissue to reach the fracture. And once they open that site, surgeons typically perform internal fixation. This is the placement of actual hardware, your plates, your screws, pins, directly onto or into the bone to hold it all in place.
And because they have that direct anatomical access, the complexity of the procedure and obviously the code value skyrockets, right?
Completely. That increased complexity gets you those higher value CPT codes. For major long bones, you're looking at brackets like 27500 for the femur or 27800 for the tibia. You have to comb through the operative report for specific mentions of a new incision or direct exposure of the bone by the surgeon. Which leaves us with the third category. And honestly, this one sounds like a sci-fi compromise. Percutaneous skeletal fixation. Break down this hybrid method for us.
It really is a hybrid. It's not fully open, meaning they aren't slicing down to expose the bone to the naked eye, but it is vastly more invasive than a standard closed treatment. The surgeon stabilizes the bone by literally driving pins or wires straight through the intact skin and right into the bone fragments.
Wait, so they're just flying blind?
Not quite. Because they can't see the bone directly, they rely incredibly heavily on imaging guidance, specifically real-time fluoroscopy. They are watching the precise placement of all this hardware live on a screen while they drill.
Moving right along, Section 3, the Global Fracture Package. This is where the compliance errors just pile up. CPT dictates that certain services are fully included in the primary code, period.
Yeah, if we think about the components of this global package, you have the primary procedure code taking up the main chunk, but you also have the initial cast or splint application and the subsequent cast removal.
The absolute most common error we see in this industry is coders trying to bill separately for that very first cast applied during the fracture treatment. It is strictly bundled right into the surgical code. And when the patient comes back later to get that initial cast removed, guess what? Also bundled. Claiming either of these individually during initial care is a direct compliance violation, and the insurance companies will gleefully deny it. All right, Section 4, modifiers and exceptions. Because as we all know, healthcare is rarely perfectly straightforward. Exactly. Modifiers provide the specific context you need to legally bypass those standard bundling rules when patient care gets a little complicated.
Let's do a rapid-fire breakdown of the most critical modifiers you need to know. First up, Modifier 54.
Modifier 54 is your split care modifier. You use this when the surgeon performs the initial repair, but a totally different provider takes over the subsequent care. The person who actually performed a surgery gets their share, and the person handling the follow-up visits gets theirs, all without breaking those strict global bundle rules. Makes perfect sense. Next one up, Modifier 76. Modifier 76 is required for repeat procedures. Let's say a patient has a closed treatment with manipulation. They go home, and 2 weeks later, the bone slips completely out of place. They have to come back in for a second manual alignment. You append Modifier 76 to communicate clearly that this isn't a duplicate billing error. It is a medically necessary repeat of the exact same procedure during the global period. And finally, Modifier 56. But this one comes with a massive red flag, doesn't it? Oh, a huge one. This is a strict compliance warning. Modifier 56 represents preoperative care, but under CPT guidelines, Modifier 56 has a very specific restriction. It is never used in fracture treatment coding. Never. So just don't even think about it. Exactly. If you append 56 to a fracture code, you are practically inviting an instant denial. Which brings us to our wrap-up. Section 5, the final workflow. To survive these audits, you have to force your logic completely away from the visual injury and laser focus on the surgeon's exact entry method. It all comes down to these 3 key questions. 1, did the surgeon surgically open the site? 2, how exactly was the bone stabilized? And 3, which services are already swallowed by the global bundle? So the next time you open an operative report, stop and ask yourself, are you coding the trauma your eyes see, or are you coding the mechanics of what the surgeon actually did? Getting that wrong is a trap you simply can't afford to fall into.